Hey guys, so first things first, I'm probably not going to be on 800 subscribers by the time that this is uploaded, but I will be very soon, so thank you for that. I'll just get that out of the way now. Second of all, I've always had an active interest in religion, and I like to talk about it, but recently I decided that I was going to move all of my religious stuff to another channel. Having said that, there's nothing there yet. This is the first video I was going to upload, and as I was doing it, I was thinking, you know what, this is very relevant to my current channel. Now, admittedly, there will be a lot of things on the religion channel which will be relevant to this, like things dealing with social issues and religion and stuff like that. This will probably be the only time when I do a crossover, but basically, this is a video about the way that Islam encourages and allows marital rape. It's a very long video. You've probably noticed that. I was considering splitting it up into two parts. I just don't really ever like doing that. I always find it kind of just makes it feel like there's an abrupt cut in the middle. So yeah, basically watch it if you like, and hopefully you enjoy it, or don't. Sorry, no, not hopefully you don't enjoy it, or don't watch it because it doesn't interest you. In fact, the whole reason why I'm moving the religious stuff over to a different channel is because I'm assuming some people won't be interested in that, and I don't like the idea of people who like my feminism unsubscribing because they don't like my religious stuff. So there you go. I thought I'd start off with a quote by feminist theorist Joanne Smith, as found on page 3 of the 1993 revised edition of her 1989 book Misogynies. In October 1991, the House of Lords removed a centuries-old right from the men of England and Wales. It stopped them raping their wives. I exaggerate, of course. Even the highest court in the land cannot prevent husbands from forcing their wives to have sex against their will. But it did remove the immunity from prosecution they had enjoyed since 1736. In that year, a ruling by a 17th century judge, Sir Matthew Hale, was published and stated as a definitive statement of law. According to Hale, a woman agreed to have sex when she married and could never ever change her mind. He said, "A husband cannot be guilty of a rape committed by himself upon his lawful wife, for by their mutual matrimonial consent and contract, the wife hath given herself up in this kind unto her husband, which she cannot retract." Even the English law lords, all male and by no means radical, found this hard to stomach in 1991, upholding the conviction of a 38-year-old man jailed for assaulting and attempting to rape his estranged wife. They agreed that Hale's ruling was an anachronistic and offensive fiction. This passage, while poignant, is wrong about one thing. This law was not anachronistic by the standards of the 1990s, as Estelle B. Friedman notes in her 2002 book, No Turning Back, page 288, only 17 countries considered marital rape a crime in 1998. But still, we might think that these laws, damaging as they were simply an example of societies being slow to adjust, and that these attitudes were in fact centuries old. But in reality, we have examples of these laws that excuse men's rape of their intimate partners being updated for the current situation. As Andrea Dworkin writes in Pornography, Men Possessing Women, 1981, page 103, in 13 states the right of marital rape has been extended by statute to cohabitation. In 5 of those states, a man who rapes a so-called voluntary social companion is partially protected by statute. In one of those states, West Virginia, he is fully protected. This, then, was not simply an oversight. Even as marriage became less important and cohabitation without marriage became more acceptable, the idea that a man could rape his long-term significant other remained a present enough notion in people's minds for this idea to be extended. I bring this up to show that we in the West are not too far removed from this way of looking at marriage and women more generally, and thus any ideology, which not only seemingly, but inescapably, encourages this way of looking at women, must be opposed as a serious threat to women's hard-won rights in this regard. For if we are to continue to fight against marital rape in the many countries where it is still legal, we cannot tolerate an ideology that would undermine this fight. So in this video I'm going to be talking about how the Quran supports marital rape, in particular this verse here. Surah 2, 223. Your wives are a place of sowing of seed for you. So come to your place of cultivation however you wish, and put forth righteousness for yourselves, and fear Allah, and know that you will meet him, and give good tidings to the believers. Here are a few other translations, and in particular this one I think sounds a lot less clunky. Muhammad Sawa, your wives are as fields for you. You may enter your fields from any place you want. Reserve something good for your souls for the life hereafter, having fear of God and knowing that you are going to meet him. Muhammad, give the glad news to the believers. There is difficulty translating that word, harthtun, since it broadly refers to the process of sowing and reaping crops. Thus, it is commonly translated to tilth, although this translation is rather useless since most people don't know what a tilth is, and tilth isn't even recognized as a word by my Microsoft spell checker. And this is why many will instead simply insert the definition, the place that you sow your seeds. But like I say, this is clunky. The best translation, the most easily comprehensible and accessible, would be to say farmland. This is why I like the honesty of using the word field, although a field is a bit non-specific, hence why farmland is the best word here. It communicates exactly what this verse is saying, that your wives are the place where you plant your seed, meaning you ejaculate in their womb, and therefore, just as your farmland is yours to do with as you please, so too are your wives. And from the absence of any translations using the term farmland, I can only assume that translators are conscious of how that might sound, and want to try and obscure what this verse is saying as much as they can. But I don't want to obscure what this verse is saying, so to avoid being accused of such, and also because I think it's good practice anyway, let's read the whole passage, from the verse, also known as ayah, 222 through to 227, beginning, Surah 2, 222, and they ask you about menstruation. Say, it is harm, so keep away from wives during menstruation, and do not approach them until they are pure, and when they have purified themselves, then come to them from where Allah has ordained for you. Indeed, Allah loves those who are constantly repentant and loves those who purify themselves. Okay, so we start off by saying that women are impure because of menstruation, basically demonizing womanhood. This is especially ironic since many Muslim apologists will argue that this next verse is complimenting women because being the place where life is made is a good thing to be respected, but menstruation, which is an instrumental part in a woman's fertility, is called impure. And then we get the offending verse. Surah 2, 223, your wives are a place of sowing of seeds for you, so come to your place of cultivation however you wish and put forth righteousness for yourselves, and fear Allah, and know that you will meet Him, and give good tidings to the believers. Followed by Surah 2, 224 to 227, and do not make your oath by Allah an excuse against being righteous and fearing Allah, and making peace among people. And Allah is hearing and knowing. Allah does not impose blame upon you for what is unintentional in your oaths, but He imposes blame upon you for what your hearts have earned, and Allah is forgiving and forbearing. For those who swear not to have sexual relations with their wives is a waiting time of 4 months, but if they return to normal relations, then indeed Allah is forgiving and merciful. And if they decide on divorce, then indeed Allah is hearing and knowing. Now, if some of that seems scarcely even coherent, don't worry, it's not your fault. The Quran is notoriously poorly written and difficult to understand. Sometimes it's straight up impossible to understand. Take for example that statement, for those who swear not to have sexual relations with their wives is a waiting time of 4 months. But if they return to normal relations, then indeed Allah is forgiving and merciful. Does this mean that abstaining from sexual relations with your wife is bad, but if you stop abstaining and return to have sex with them, then Allah will forgive you for having abstained in the first place? Or does this mean that abstaining from sexual relations with your wife is good, but if you stop abstaining and returning to have sex with them, then Allah will forgive you for having failed to abstain? And this is ignoring the fact that the parenthetical remarks are all additions. They are there to try and make it easier to understand. This can get ridiculous when you're dealing with some Quran verses that have more parenthetical clarifications than actual original Quranic text. Like I say, the Quran is very difficult to understand, and that's why you haven't really read the Quran until you've read a tafsir. A tafsir, for those who don't know, is a commentary on the Quran that appeals to primary Islamic sources, mostly hadith, in order to explain the context of the original passage. Now, this isn't like Christianity, where commentaries are considered to be of a very much ancillary nature, because the Bible is typically easy to understand and well written. There are confusing passages, of course, and commentaries are useful, but there are significant chunks of the Bible, especially the epistles, that explain themselves as clearly as the best commentary. No, with the Quran, it is literally indecipherable without a commentary. Yes, this does leave a big gaping hole for corruption to sneak in. If the Quran is hard to interpret and anybody can just write a commentary and interpret it, then you're not really following Allah or Muhammad, but simply some random dude's interpretation of it. What you need is a critically acclaimed tafsir, well regarded for using the highest quality Islamic sources to give the best possible understanding of what the Quran is really saying. Enter Tafsir Ibn Kathir. Not only is it really nice to say, sort of rhythmic in a way, Tafsir Ibn Kathir, and so on, but it's also objectively the best commentary going on the Quran, except for the other commentary which is better. Everybody loves it, even though we only have partial English translations because they're too afraid to translate some of the really messed up stuff into English. But let's just ignore that. Oh, and a lot of academics don't really like it, but we're not talking about academics, we're talking about Islamic orthodoxy. Now, the first thing you need to understand is that Islamic standards for historical reliability are both contrary to academic standards and wildly inconsistent in their own right. See, the earliest commentary, Tafsir al-Tabari, which is not so coincidentally considered the best, was completed 250 years after Muhammad's death. Now, I know that it might sound a bit awkward that we have a book that's very hard to understand, and the only way to understand it is with commentaries, and the earliest commentary we have is from 250 years after Muhammad's death. However, you need to remember that these commentaries are based on the eyewitness accounts found in the Hadith, the earliest of which was completed just over 200 years after Muhammad's death. But like we say, it's either accept texts written 200 plus years later as authoritative, or just accept that we'll never be able to really understand half of what the Quran is going on about. So just stop worrying about the date, you nerd. Still, when it comes to Christianity, make sure that you constantly bring up that some contemporary scholars place the Gospel of John as being written 60 to 80 years after Jesus' death, because that proves it isn't to be trusted, right? However, if you want to read al-Tabari's tafsir, you better learn Arabic, because they haven't translated it into English yet. I could find a text that partially translated it to English, but the commentary on Surah 2, 223 wasn't there. So if you don't have time to learn Arabic because you're trying to upload videos with more consistency, then you turn to Ibn Kathir, considered the second most reliable tafsir by your standard Muslim, written about 700 years after the death of Muhammad. So let's see what it says. This is all accessible on archive.org because somebody actually bothered to translate this text, so I'm going to read most of the text except for any smaller sides I might consider to be irrelevant, but I will show you the whole text so you can pause and read everything to see if I'm misrepresenting. Anyway, the reason behind revealing Allah's statement, "Your wives are a tilth for you," Allah said, "Your wives are a tilth for you." Ibn Abbas commented, meaning the place of pregnancy. Okay, so it's now defined what it means by saying tilth. It's the place where you get your wife pregnant. Basically, your wife is a baby maker. But to be fair, it doesn't say that's all the wife is, so we'll let it off. Allah then said, "So go to your tilth when or how you will," meaning wherever you wish from the front or behind, as long as sex takes place in one valve, the female sexual organ, as the authentic hadiths have indicated. Alright, so this is definitely in keeping with what we would assume from a cursory reading, that this verse is allowing husbands to do whatever they want with their wives, with only the strictures of Islam, not the desires of the woman, dictating what can't be done. For example, you can't do anal because Islam prohibits it, but you can have sex in whatever position you want because your wife is farmland for you. Now we get a whole load of hadiths to explain the specific context for this passage. For instance, al-Bukhari recorded that Ibn al-Munkadir said that he heard Jabir say that the Jews used to claim that if one had sex with his wife from behind in the vagina, the offspring would become cross-eyed. Then, this ayah was revealed. Your wives are a tilth for you. Go to your tilth when or how you will. Muslim and Abu Dawood also reported this hadith. Ibn Abu Hatim said that Muhammad bin al-Munkadir narrated that Jabir bin Abdullah told him that the Jews claimed to the Muslims that if one has sex with their wife from behind in the vagina, their offspring will become cross-eyed. Allah revealed afterwards, "Your wives are a tilth for you, so go to your tilth when or how you will." Ibn Jurayyi, one of the reporters of the hadith, said that Allah's messenger said, "From the front or from behind, as long as it occurs in the fajr," vagina. Imam Ahmad recorded that Ibn Abbas said, "The ayah, 'Your wives are a tilth for you,' was revealed about some people from the Ansar who came to the Prophet and asked him about having sex with the wife from behind. He said to them, 'Have sex with her as you like as long as that occurs in the vagina.'" Imam Ahmad recorded that Abdullah bint Sabit said, "I went to Hafsa bint Abdur Rahman bin Abu Bakr and said, 'I wish to ask you about something, but I am shy.' She said, 'Do not be shy, my nephew.' He said, 'About having sex from behind with women.' She said, Salama told me that the Ansar used to refrain from having sex from behind in the vagina. The Jews claim that those who had sex with the women from behind would have offspring with crossed eyes. When the Muhajirun came to Al-Madinah, they married Ansar women and had sex with them from behind. One of these women would not obey her husband and said, 'You will not do that until I go to Allah's messenger and ask him about this matter.' She went to Salama and told her the story. Salama said, 'Wait until Allah's messenger comes.' When Allah's messenger came, the Ansari woman was shy to ask him about this matter, so she left. Salama told Allah's messenger the story and he said, 'Summon the Ansari woman.' She was summoned and he recited this ayah to her, 'Your wives are a tilth for you, so go to your tilth when or how you will.' He added, 'Only in one valve, the vagina.' This hadith was also collected by al-Tamari, who said Hasan. An-Nasai reported that Ka'b bin al-Qamah said that Abu an-Nadir said that he asked Nafi, 'The people are repeating the statement that you relate from Ibn Umar that he allowed sex with women in the rear, anus.' He said, 'They have said a lie about me, but let me But let me tell you what really happened. Ibn Umar was once reciting the Quran while I was with him, and he reached the ayah, "Your wives are a tilth for you, so go to your tilth when or how you will." He then said, "O Nafi, do you know the story behind this ayah?" I said no. He said, "We, the people of Quraysh, used to have sexual intercourse with our wives from the back in the vagina. When we migrated to Al-Madinah and married some Ansari women, we wanted to do the same with them. They disliked it and made a big issue of it. The Ansari women had followed the practices of the Jews who have sex with their women while they lay on their sides. Then Allah revealed, 'Your wives are a tilth for you, so go to your tilth when or how you will.' This has an authentic chain of narrators." So if we look at the passage, we see the clear meaning of the verse. If your wives don't want to have sex with you a particular way, that doesn't matter because they're your wives. So have sex with them however you want. Indeed, in the time I've spent asking Muslims about this passage, I've always used this tafsir to show that clear meaning of this verse. So it came as a surprise to me when one day I was speaking to a Muslim and I brought up this verse, and before I could even bring up the tafsir, they brought it up and said, "If you read Tafsir Ibn Kathir, you'll see how you are misinterpreting the verse." They caught me off guard, since I've been using the very same tafsir to validate that this verse is indeed talking about the right of a man to have sex with his wife however he wishes. So I asked what they meant in saying that it showed how I was taking this verse out of context. They responded by quoting the tafsir at me, hadith by hadith, but not making any effort to explain how the hadiths were supposed to be changing my understanding of the verse. Now, as it happens, the entire conversation had been based on false pretenses, because I'd been assuming that this person I was talking to understood marital rape to be a bad thing. I was mistaken. I sent a transcript of our conversation to my partner, but apparently Skype can't save conversation logs going back more than a couple of months, so I have to roughly paraphrase. Basically, the Muslim said, "Well, obviously the wife can't just keep the husband from having sex with her, he has rights too." At which point I asked, "Right, but that would be rape though, right?" And they replied, "How can it be rape if she is your wife? That makes no sense." This is why I started by talking about how recently it was that the illegality of raping your wife was firmly established in many countries. Because in many Muslim societies, which can often be centuries behind the West, they are unsurprisingly not doing any better than the West when it comes to recognizing that forcing your wife to have sex with you is wrong. Indeed, they're substantially behind. And that's why it's so hard to find any Muslim who is able to explain why Surah 2:223 means anything other than that a husband is the ultimate decider when it comes to sex with his wife, whether she wants it or not. Most Muslims don't even think there is anything here to defend. It's important to understand that many Muslims still have a very outdated understanding of what rape is, which is to say, for many, rape exists with a mind towards a patriarchal understanding of women as property, farmland, if you can imagine such a thing. Hopefully I will be able to find the clip, but in an Act 17 Apologetics live broadcast, a Muslim wrote in and complained that they were wrong to characterize Islam as supporting rape with reference to the rape of female captives. He said, all the women that the men had sex with had been divorced or their husbands had been killed.
Baby-faced assassin says, if the parents consent, it's not rape, so it's halal. Guys, one thing we want everyone to understand here is how Muhammad and his practices and his teachings and his revelations have influenced the world. Think about what he's saying right here. If parents consent to you having sex with their little girl, then it's not rape. So according to Baby-faced assassin here, our champion Muslim apologist, it's not rape if you go in and climb on top of that girl because her parents said it's okay. Parents said it's fine. It's just not rape. You guys understand that? It's halal. It's halal. Now, he would say, okay, you have to marry her, or if we went with the Muslim sources, even if you hired her for temporary marriage, muta, something like that, all of that would be fine. Or if you took her as your sex slave, your captive, or something like that, all of that would be fine. I'm hoping there's some level of reason that you would understand that is disgusting. To say this little girl, this 9-year-old girl, who has no clue what sex is, who has no idea, this guy's going to climb on top of her. She is going to have no idea what is going on until he rams his penis into her. And you're saying, but it's not rape. What do you mean by rape? See, guys, this is the point. In Islam, there's a reason. In Islam, did you know you can't actually rape your wife? They have no concept of that. I've seen Muslim scholars say they're making fun of America, and they say, did you know that in America you can rape your wife?
They're shocked.
And I don't mean you can force yourself upon your wife. They find it ridiculous that if you do force yourself on your wife, it's called rape, right? They can't comprehend, right? In Islam, rape is a sexual relationship that you are not permitted to have, right? You're doing something and you're not allowed to do it, right? So if you are allowed to do it, as in the case here, oh, okay, her parents have said you can go climb on top of this 9-year-old girl. It's perfectly acceptable. They don't believe it's rape.
Exactly.
And you're seeing the influence. You're seeing the influence and the impact of Islam, and it's indisputable. It's right here. This is what Muslims are saying. Muslims are here in the chat saying, if your parents say, hey, you're 9 years old, I'm handing you off to this guy, and you say, I don't know what's going on, and he climbs on top of you and puts his penis inside of you without you having any clue, or without you being in any way able to consent because you have no clue what's going on, it's perfectly acceptable in Islam. What a great, wonderful religion.
Now, for a minute, we'll ignore the fact that this is completely untrue. We have examples of Muhammad saying that it's okay for his followers to have sex with married female captives. But either way, whether a woman has a husband or not is not what makes it rape. What makes it rape is whether or not the woman consents to sex. However, if you view women as the property of men, then rape becomes a crime against somebody else's property. But if a woman becomes your wife and your slave, then rape is not a crime, because it's simply you doing as you please with your property. You are coming to your field how you wish, to use the Quran's wording. Indeed, I shouldn't say rape is not a crime, because many Muslims would simply deny that what is occurring is rape. How can it be rape if she is your wife? This is the logic that one gets out of reading Surah 2:223, not least of all when taking into account the commentary. Nonetheless, I have made an effort to try and understand how one might use the Ibn Kathir commentary to excuse these actions, and I came up with an argument. Please note, this is an argument I have never seen a Muslim present. It is the best argument I could come up with. If you were willing to add to the text, you could say that the only reason these women didn't want to have sex was because they thought their husbands weren't allowed to. Therefore, in this context, when the Muslim men were told that they could have sex with their wives however they liked, this met the one condition the women had for whether they were willing to perform this act. Now, firstly, the obvious problem here is that this is an awful way to communicate this message. If the message here is that no sexual position should be prohibited, then there's an easier way to say that. It's the way I just said it. But instead, the Quran inexplicably decided to communicate the message that no sexual position is prohibited by saying that your wives are farmland, so you can have sex with them however you like. The other problem here is that not only is this interpretation adding to the commentary, but it's also contradicting the commentary. The commentary says, when we migrated to Al-Madinah and married some Ansari women, we wanted to do the same with them. They disliked it and made a big issue out of it. Notice the contrast. We wanted it, they disliked it. And the judgment came down, they're your wives, they're where you ejaculate, they're farmland, so have sex with them however you want. Rather perversely, to interpret this as saying that the only reason the women didn't want to have sex this way was because they thought their husbands weren't allowed to, is to imply that the women were being in some way liberated to fulfill their true desires, and this was communicated by giving the men the right to have sex with their wives however they want. With this interpretation, the verse boils down to, women want men to use them however they want. Even when they disliked it and objected, they really wanted it. Therefore, when the Quran says that a man can have sex with his wife however he wants, that is justified. Indeed, it is liberation for women. That was the best I could do after trying my best to come up with the best interpretation for this account of events found in Ibn Kathir, and still, we cannot escape the obvious meaning of the text. By the way, you might be wondering what that bit towards the end of the text is where it says, and put forth righteousness for yourself. You might think that means basically to try and be nice or kind or respectful to your wife. You know, it's saying to be righteous, so maybe that's what being righteous means. Well, just to read a bit further on in Ibn Kathir we have, Allah said, and send for your own selves beforehand, meaning by performing the acts of worship while refraining from whatever Allah has prohibited to you. This is why Allah said afterwards, and fear Allah and know that you are to meet Him in the hereafter, meaning He will hold you accountable for all your deeds, and give good tidings to the believers, O Muhammad, meaning those who obey what Allah has commanded and refrain from what He has prohibited. Ibn Jarir reported that Attar said, or related to Ibn Abbas, and send for your own selves beforehand means mention Allah's name by saying Bismillah before having sexual intercourse. Al-Bukhari also reported that Ibn Abbas narrated that Allah's messenger said, if any one of you on having sexual relations with his wife said, in the name of Allah, Allah, protect us from Satan and also protect what you bestow upon us, i.e. the coming offspring, from Satan. And if it is destined that they should have a child then, Satan will never be able to harm him. So no, it isn't saying anything about how you are treating the woman you're having sex with, it's simply saying that you should pray for yourself and your potential future offspring before having sex. What we see then is that the tafsir gives us strong evidence for concluding that this verse is excusing and in fact commanding marital rape. What's bizarre to me is that many Muslims will literally quote the tafsir back to you even after you have used it in your own argument. When I appealed to Muslims on Reddit to try and understand this verse, I had a private message exchange with somebody. As part of a longer message, I sent them this. I think I may have been uncharitable for you, since the verse in question, 2:223, on the surface might not seem that bad before you look into it in more detail. Quran 2:223, your wives are a place of sowing of seeds for you, so come to your place of cultivation however you wish and put forth righteousness for yourselves, and fear Allah and know that you will meet Him and give good tidings to the believers. But if we actually look into the wider context of this verse, particularly one of the most reputable tafsirs, Ibn Kathir, the insidious origins of the verse become more apparent. You can find the text here, but to summarize, there were a certain group of people who were against having sex in a particular position. The women from this area didn't want to have sex from behind, so the Quran says that your wives are the place where you sow seed, so it's up to you how you have sex with them. This is to say, the women's objections are utterly discounted, and men are given authority to have sex with their wives however they wish. And they replied with a link to a tafsir site before saying, this page has many tafsirs in it, but I will only quote Ibn Kathir as you wish. Sorry for the lengthy quote, but I tried my best to shorten it. So in response to my argument, which centered on Tafsir Ibn Kathir, they responded by simply copy and pasting Tafsir Ibn Kathir, albeit editing it down slightly. They didn't acknowledge the substance of my argument, or acknowledge that they were appealing to the very same source as me. And what's worse, in the message before that, they had said, really sorry for this inconvenience, but I want a clear mind to read and analyze your arguments, because I'm open to change my mind if your arguments are right. This has been very much my experience whenever I have tried to understand this verse from an Islamic perspective. No attempt to actually engage the argument, no apparent ability to even comprehend the argument, simply mindless quoting of sources without thinking about what the sources even say. And yes, I did offer up a response, and no, they didn't respond after that. Now, apart from this, Muslims will attempt to argue using other sources to show that sure, their interpretation of Surah 2:223 is a stretch, but it is justified by the other verses which show how 2:223 couldn't possibly mean what it's obviously saying. Now, the first response is the laziest and worst response, a generic passage in the Quran or the Hadith commanding Muslims to be kind to women or indeed to their wives. Now, I won't even go to the effort of quoting these sources because of course they're there. There are thousands of Quran verses and tens of thousands of Sahih Hadiths. Sahih means reliable if you didn't know. Unsurprisingly, there are plenty that command Muslims to love their wives. But the command in itself is a bit meaningless, because men throughout history have claimed to love their wives. The idea of loving your wife is not a uniquely egalitarian concept. Many sexists love their wives. Of course, this is easily conceivable in the case of microaggressions. A man who constantly interrupts or undermines or gaslights his wife will still say he loves her. He doesn't need to treat her as an equal in order to love her. I love my cat. Those who own dogs love their dogs. The love we have for our pet is still love, but it is not the love that we should give to a wife. But then this can even extend to physical beating. If I hit my cat when he bites me, I can justify it by saying that an animal cannot understand reason, so there must be an immediate physical consequence in order to discourage bad behavior. The same can apply for a small child. One might argue that a child can't understand reasoned moral arguments, so a physical punishment is more appropriate. And I don't agree with this, but I wouldn't say that such a person does not love their child. So indeed, if somebody has an infantilized view of women, say if they consider the intellect of a woman to be half that of a man's, then it makes sense that they would say that striking a woman would be excusable. And of course, in the case of rape, as sickening as it is, there are men who claim that their rape is an act of love, because after all, isn't sex called making love? Isn't sex a way that people express love? So even if a woman is physically uncomfortable, if she is crying, if she is asking her husband to stop, the husband can fall back on the fact that sex is an expression of love. So of course he must love her, even if his entitlement mentality causes him to have sex with her whenever he wants. So, quite simply, to say that you love your wife means nothing. To love somebody does not mean to respect them as an equal, and even to say somebody is an equal must be a claim that is backed up by your actions. Now finally, I have to be fair and present to you the best response that I got in all the time that I have been asking Muslims about this issue, trying to make sure that this video was not just coming from ignorance without understanding the Muslim position, and the argument was simply the following quotation. Majmu' al-Fatwa 32-271, Muslim narrated in his Sahih 1006 from Abu Jar, may Allah be pleased with him, that the Messenger of Allah, blessings and peace of Allah be upon him, said, the intimacy of one of you with his wife is a charity. They said, O Messenger of Allah, if one of us fulfills his desire, will he be rewarded for that? He said, do you not see that if he did it in a haram manner, there would be a burden of sin on him for that. Similarly, if he does it in a halal manner, he will be rewarded for it. In that case, what the wise husband must do is take care of his wife in that regard and give it priority over everything else so that he may keep her chaste, conceal her, and meet her needs as much as he can, even if he does not have an urgent need for that and even if he had to do it only for her, for the sake of meeting his wife's needs. In that there will be a reward for both of them, inshallah, and a means of help so that they attain spiritual and worldly well-being. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, may Allah have mercy on him, said, causing harm to the wife by not having intercourse is grounds for annulment in all cases. Whether the husband did that intentionally or otherwise, and whether he was able to do it or not, it is like maintenance and even more important. End quote. However, there is one issue. I searched for days to try and find this text in its original context, so I could read around it and actually find out the precise nature of this text, to no avail. But it does reference Sahih Muslim 1006, so let's look at that. Except when you look up Sahih Muslim 1006, you get a completely different text, because there are different numbering systems for hadith. I genuinely think that the death threats and things like that isn't the main reason people abstain from criticizing Islam. It's simply because it almost seems to be intentionally designed to be as confusing as possible to learn more about. But fortunately, if you're an alpha like me, you can find it anyway. And it reads in full, Abu Jar reported, some of the companions came to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and they said, O Messenger of Allah, the rich have taken all the rewards. They pray as we pray, they fast as we fast, and they give charity from their extra wealth. The Prophet said, has not Allah made for you ways to give charity? In every glorification of Allah is charity. In every declaration of His greatness is charity. In every praise of Him is charity. In every declaration of His oneness is charity. Enjoining good is charity and forbidding evil is charity. And in a man's intimate relations with his wife is charity. They said, O Messenger of Allah, is there a reward for one who satisfies his passions? The Prophet said, you see that if he were to satisfy his passions with the unlawful, it would be a burden of sin upon him. Likewise, if he were to satisfy himself with the lawful, he will have a reward. So there we go. Not necessarily a bad message. Just because you're poor, it doesn't mean you can't give charity. You can give charity through actions that cost nothing, including having sex with your wife. And from this, the text continues, in that case, what the wise husband must do is take care of his wife in that regard and give it priority over everything else so that he may keep her chaste, conceal her and meet her needs as much as he can, even if he does not have an urgent need for that and even if he had to do it only for her, for the sake of meeting his wife's needs. In that, there will be a reward for both of them, inshallah, and a means of help so that they attain spiritual and worldly well-being. Please note, by the way, that this bit of text here is not being directly attributed to anybody important. The only two people who matter in Islam are either Allah, by quoting the Quran, or Muhammad, by quoting the Hadith, which tell of the actions and views of Muhammad. If Muhammad didn't say it, and if it isn't in the Quran, it isn't worth anything. So instead, this is simply an interpretation of the authoritative text, not an authoritative text itself, and it isn't a very good one. Muhammad in Sahih Muslim says that it's good to have sex with your wife, and from this we get the interpretation that the husband should have sex with the wife, even when he doesn't want to, for the wife's pleasure. This is something not found in any primary sources. And then finally, this passage concludes, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, may Allah have mercy on him, said, causing harm to the wife by not having intercourse is grounds for annulment in all cases, whether the husband did that intentionally or otherwise, and whether he was able to do it or not, it's like maintenance, and even more important. So Ibn Taymiyyah is confusingly the author of a book called Majmu' al-Fatawa. This is where I must frustratedly concede that I don't actually know who the author of this particular passage is, because there are several books with the same name published by different authors. And when I spoke to the person who brought this up, I simply copy and pasted the text, and now I can't find any evidence of this specific passage in any book available online. Now, I'm not suggesting that this passage is made up, but I think it's telling that this is the most progressive statement I can find on sexual relations in Islamic marriage, and it's from a book so obscure that I can't even find out who it's by. But regarding Ibn Taymiyyah, he was a controversial medieval theologian, and when the Wikipedia page starts off by saying he was controversial first and foremost, I think there needs to be a strong argument for why his teaching should go against all other sources. Anyway, so that's the best counter-argument I've seen, dealt with as best as I can, bearing in mind that the source they used to argue their case is so obscure that it was impossible for me to deal with it comprehensively since I couldn't even find it. Now, in my search for a justification for Surah 2, 223, I found an Islamic website dealing with this question. Please let me know the meaning of tilth in regards to the relationship of husband and wife. This will be a springboard for elucidating further problems with this passage. See, while they make a pretty bad attempt to try and explain away the passage about your wives being farmland, they then make the following argument for why this shouldn't actually be concerning. Sahih al-Bukhari Hadith 4460, Narrated by Abu Hurairah, Allah's Messenger, said, if a husband calls his wife to his bed, i.e. to have sexual relation, and she refuses, and causes him to sleep in anger, the angels will curse her till morning. Al-Tirmidhi, Hadith 3257, narrated by Tawq ibn Al, Allah's Messenger said, when a man calls his wife to satisfy his desire, she must go to him, even if she is occupied at the oven. And just as Islam guides it is a sin for a woman to refuse the invitation of a husband for sexual intercourse, the absolute majority of the scholars and jurists in Islam are of the opinion that if a husband were to refuse the invitation of his wife without an absolute valid and genuine reason, it would be a sin in the sight of the Lord. Now, here's the thing. If this is your standard, truth might as well not exist, because we start off with the two hadith that declare that a woman has an obligation to have sex with the husband the minute he wants some action. And when you add this onto the claim that the husband can have sex with the wife however he wishes, you get an unsavory combination. So now, not only can the husband have sex with the wife however he likes, but the wife will be cursed if she refuses to have sex with him that very night, and she is obligated to stop whatever she is doing to have sex with him. There's no expectation that the man should hold his passion just for one night, and he's already been told that he can have sex with his wife whenever he wants. This is a recipe for rape. And yet, this person is able to simply say, well, since it says that women are obligated to have sex with a husband whenever he wants, however he wants, I'm sure the same would also go the other way around for when a wife wants her husband to have sex with him. I mean, it's not like Islam has double standards for men and women when it comes to sex. So, let's ignore the fact that there would have been many ways for the Quran and the Hadith to clearly communicate that this goes both ways. Let's even ignore the fact that the Quran and the Hadith are replete with double standards for men and women when it comes to sex. Even ignoring all of that, and being as charitable as possible, we still have the fact that the Quran explicitly establishes that a man has plenty of right to forsake a woman in bed. We see this first of all in the Quran, Surah 4:34. Men are in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend for maintenance from their wealth. So righteous women are devoutly obedient, guarding in the husband's absence what Allah would have them guard. But those wives from whom you fear arrogance, first advise them, then if they persist, forsake them in bed, and finally strike them. But if they obey you once more, seek no means against them. Indeed, Allah is ever exalted and grand. Now, yes, this also commands husbands to hit their wives, and yes, that is worth drawing attention to, but it also establishes that the husband can refuse to sleep with his wife. Why? Because he fears rebellion from them. That is to say, refusing to have sex with your wife is viewed as a valid punishment for misbehavior, or indeed even a preemptive punishment if you fear misbehavior. So no, it doesn't work both ways. Oh, I'm sure the wife is permitted to refuse to sleep with her husband as a punishment. That must have been what it meant when it said that there would be a curse upon her if she didn't have sex with her husband the very night that he wanted it. But it gets worse, because it isn't just okay to forsake your wife as a punishment, but also for another reason, as we see in Surah 4:128. And if a woman fears from her husband contempt or evasion, there is no sin upon them if they make terms of settlement between them, and settlement is best, and present in human souls is stinginess. But if you do good and fear Allah, then indeed Allah is ever, with what you do, acquainted. What I find is most curious about learning more about Islam is that you'd think, indeed the popular perception amongst pseudo-educated liberal types is that the more you learn about it, the more the context explains how the explicitly bad verses are simply misunderstood. What you instead find is that not only do the bad verses remain inexcusable, even with context, but many seemingly benign verses are actually revealed to be objectionable from looking at the context. And this is such an example, because again, this verse on its own is totally meaningless, and indeed, even when we add the rest of the passage, there is still not much that can be gleaned. And they request from you, O Muhammad, a legal ruling concerning women. Say, Allah gives you a ruling about them and about what has been recited to you in the book concerning the orphan girls to whom you do not give what is decreed to them, and yet you desire to marry them, and concerning the oppressed among children, and that you maintain for orphans their rights and justice. And whatever you do of good, indeed Allah is ever knowing of it. And if a woman fears from her husband contempt or evasion, there is no sin upon them if they make terms of settlement between them, and settlement is best. And present in human souls is stinginess. But if you do good and fear Allah, then indeed Allah is ever, with what you do, acquainted, and you will never be able to be equal in feeling between wives, even if you should strive to do so. So do not incline completely towards one, and leave another hanging. And if you amend your affairs and fear Allah, then indeed Allah is ever forgiving and merciful. But if they separate by divorce, Allah will enrich each of them from His abundance, and ever is Allah encompassing and wise. And to Allah belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth. And we have instructed those who were given the scripture before you and yourselves to fear Allah. But if you disbelieve, then to Allah belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth. and ever is Allah free of need and praiseworthy. So if we want to understand this, we again need to turn to Ibn Kathir, who has assembled some sources for us. The ruling concerning desertion on the part of the husband. Allah says, and if a woman fears cruelty or desertion on her husband's part, Allah states, and us legislates accordingly, that sometimes the man inclines away from his wife, sometimes towards her, and sometimes he parts from her. In the first case, when the wife fears that her husband is steering away from her or deserting her, she is allowed to forfeit all or part of her rights, such as provisions, clothing, dwelling, and so forth, and the husband is allowed to accept such concessions from her. Hence, there is no harm if she offers such concessions, and if her husband accepts them. This is why Allah said, there is no sin on them both if they make terms of peace between them. He then said, and making peace is better than divorce. Allah's statement, and human souls are swayed by greed, means coming to peaceful terms, and even when it involves forfeiting some rights, is better than parting. Abu Dawood at Tayalisi recorded that Ibn Abbas said, Sauda feared that the Messenger of Allah might divorce her, and she said, O Messenger of Allah, do not divorce me, give my day to Aisha. And he did, and later on Allah sent down, if the woman fears cruelty or desertion on her husband's part, there is no sin on them both. Ibn Abbas said, whatever legal agreement the spouses mutually agree to is allowed. At-Tirmidhi recorded it and said, Hasan Garib. In the two Sahihs it is recorded that Aisha said that when Sauda bint Zama became old, she forfeited her day to Aisha, and the Prophet used to spend Sauda's day with Aisha. There is a similar narration also collected by al-Bukhari. Al-Bukhari also recorded that Aisha commented, and if a woman fears cruelty or desertion on her husband's part, that it refers to a man who is married to an old woman, and he does not desire her and wants to divorce her. So she says, I forfeit my right on you. So this ayah was revealed. Meaning of making peace is better. Allah said, and making peace is better. Ali bin Abi Talha related that Ibn Abbas said that the ayah refers to when the husband gives his wife the choice between staying with him or leaving him, as this is better than the husband preferring other wives to her. However, the apparent wording of the ayah refers to the settlement where the wife forfeits some of the rights she has over her husband, with the husband agreeing to this concession, and that this settlement is better than divorce. For instance, the Prophet kept Sauda bint Zama as his wife after she offered to forfeit her day to Aisha. By keeping her among his wives, his ummah may follow this kind of settlement, since settlement and peace are better with Allah than parting. So why did Muhammad neglect Sauda and sleep instead with his child bride Aisha? Because Sauda was too old for him. He was not attracted to her, and so, that she could remain his wife and not be divorced by him, though she had not according to any account done anything worthy of divorce apart from getting old, she offered up the night and day that Muhammad should have spent with her. If you're a bit confused, basically Muhammad had multiple wives, so he would spend different days with different wives. So already there is a lack of equality here. Muhammad can have sex with a wife every night, but his wives must wait until it's their turn. And then, because she fears divorce, Sauda says that Muhammad doesn't have to spend any time with her at all, and Allah says that this is a perfectly fine arrangement. Again, we must ask, could a wife do the same to her husband? Could a wife say that she's been thinking of divorcing her husband because he's getting old, so if he doesn't forfeit his right to physical intimacy, she's going to divorce him? Aisha was 9 when Muhammad was 52, and he first had sex with her. Could she have decided that a 52-year-old man was too old for her? Of course she couldn't. So we have another reason why Muslim husbands are allowed to neglect their wives sexually. If they are not attracted to them anymore, they can neglect them. It is at this point where I have to bring up an interesting parallel to the Bible. See, occasionally when I've spoken to Christians who are either sympathetic to Islam or simply opposed to arguments they perceive to be hypocritical, they will bring up 1 Corinthians 7:4. This verse is rather obscure and therefore I've never seen it be brought up by a Muslim. The verse reads 1 Corinthians 7:4, for the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. I mean, that sounds pretty bad, right? It sounds pretty awful. The wife has no authority over her own body, but the husband has authority over it. Surely this is even worse than the Quran, but before we go crazy, let's look at the context. Admittedly, I am guilty of some deception here, because I didn't even show the entire verse, which is this. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his body, but the wife does. And with that alone, the entire context of this verse is changed. Suddenly, this isn't talking about a husband chauvinistically having control over his wife, but rather about two people surrendering themselves to each other in love. This text is, at least in principle, equal. The only objection that could be made is some might say that in practice the husband will surrender less of himself than the wife. However, clearly the unambiguous command is for equality. Now, let's read the rest of the passage from verse 2 through to verse 5. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Significantly, that sentence immediately before adds a new dimension to this. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. In other words, this is a command to have sex with the person you're married to. Now clearly this passage at least has one thing going for it. It's undeniably egalitarian in its framing. There is no verse saying that a husband can have sex with his wife however he wants, nor is there a verse saying that a husband can refuse to have sex with his wife whenever he wants. But still, some might say that this verse is a justification for marital rape, or indeed that this verse commands marital rape, just as I would argue that Surah 2:223 commands marital rape. However, there are a few more points to consider. Firstly, there is no time factor here. Giving your significant other their conjugal rights is said to be a good thing, indeed an obligation, but it doesn't say, nor imply, that these should be given at the beck and call of either partner. It doesn't say that the wife will be under a curse if she refuses to have sex with her husband the very night that he wants to have sex, and it certainly doesn't say that she must stop what she is doing to have sex with her husband the minute he desires it. Again, a reminder that the Quran commands both those things. And let's reread those hadiths. Sahih al-Bukhari, hadith 4460, narrated by Abu Hurairah, Allah's Messenger, said, if a husband calls his wife to his bed, i.e. to have sexual relations, and she refuses and causes him to sleep in anger, the angels will curse her till morning. Al-Tirmidhi, hadith 3257, narrated by Tawq ibn Al, Allah's Messenger said, when a man calls his wife to satisfy his desire, she must go to him even if she is occupied at the oven. So yes, the Bible is condemning going long periods of time while the person you're married to is physically unsatisfied without having sex with them. But obviously use your common sense. If you go a day or two without having sex, that's not the end of the world. If you're going weeks or months without having sex, then it would be time to start pursuing counselling. However, there is another difference between this verse in the Bible and this verse in the Quran. One of these is simply saying what is right. The other one is prescribing a proactive means to force somebody to do what is right. The Bible is simply saying you should do this. You should have sex with the person you're married to. Part of being married is physical intimacy. So if you've agreed to marry somebody, you should have sex with them. Again, this applies to both sexes, and it isn't saying that either person in the marriage needs to jump into gear the second that their partner wants to have sex with them. Also, this is all assuming that the person in question wants to have sex. I don't think Paul is saying that asexual people aren't allowed to get married, or just two people who both have low sex drives. Meanwhile, the Quran is saying, hey, she's your wife, have sex with her however you want. She doesn't want to have sex in that position? Well, she's your farmland, she's where you sow your seed, so just have sex with her however you like. This isn't telling the wife to do something, it isn't acknowledging the agency of the wife at all. It's identifying her as the property of the husband, and saying that the husband can therefore do as he pleases with her. Now, it is true that when it's describing the time frame for how a woman should satisfy her husband, it is telling the woman what it is right for her to do. It isn't telling the husband to have sex with his wife whenever he wants. However, the issues remain. This is a ridiculous command to give, that a wife should have sex with her husband whenever he wants. It is incredibly unequal that this command is made of the wife, while the husband is explicitly given the right to forsake his wife in bed by the Quran and the example of Muhammad. To say that a husband can have sex with his wife however he wants, as is explicitly stated, implies that he can have sex with her whenever he wants as well. And given that these two verses exist as part of the same religious system, it makes sense to combine them together to conclude that if you're a wife who refuses to sleep with your husband one night, there's no reason to expect a devout Muslim man to respect your protests. He's been told that you are his farmland to have sex with as he pleases, and that you are under the curse of angels for not having sex with him any night he wants. And frankly, the only argument I could see being made, although I've never seen this argument be made, is that obviously Muslim women must have a right to reject their husband, or else why would it speak of a woman who goes to bed without having sex with her husband? If the husband could just rape her, then it wouldn't even be possible for her to withhold sex from her husband. However, this assumes firstly that just because marital rape is explicitly condoned in Islam, that therefore all Muslim men would do it. Secondly, it assumes that even a husband who is happy to rape his wife would not begrudge the fact that she withheld consent in the first place, thus, and I'm going to try and say this without throwing up, making the rape necessary in his mind. And thirdly, it ignores the possibility that varying levels of resistance would affect whether a woman is raped. For example, very passive resistance might not be seen as a barrier to the persistent husband. However, kicking and screaming would probably cause the husband to stop and go to bed angry. And according to Muhammad, therefore a curse would be upon the woman who fought her husband off. Such a nice religion. Anyway, slight tangent aside, what we're dealing with here is essentially a difference between being told to do something and being told how to get people to do something. Women are told to have sex with their husbands in both religions, but only in Islam are husbands given explicit permission to have sex with their wives however they like. A good analogy would be stealing. Both religions say stealing is wrong, but only Islam commands cutting off a hand for stealing. There are other examples too, like leaving the religion is wrong in both cases, but only Islam commands death for it. But a totally unreligious example helps illustrate the point even better. Feminists will often make criticisms of media based on the claim that it is sexist. Their criticism is that this media shouldn't be sexist and the sexism in it is bad. Suddenly, a bunch of angry neckbeards appear shouting, "But what about free speech? Why do feminists hate free speech?" But of course such a claim is incoherent. The feminist claim was simply about what is right or wrong. In this case, having sexist tropes in media is wrong. There was never a claim made about how to address this wrong by banning or otherwise censoring media with sexist tropes. This distinction is a really important one to get firmly established in the public's consciousness. Saying this is bad isn't the same as supporting any and all efforts to stop that thing no matter how draconian, and likewise saying this is good is not the same as supporting any and all efforts to enforce that thing no matter how draconian. The statement, "you should have sex with your marital partner," means nothing other than what it is literally saying: you should do it, and it's good that you do. It's not the same as saying, you should have sex with your marital partner whenever you want. That is to say, if they don't want to, it doesn't matter. That is abhorrent. Now, since I quoted the whole passage when looking at the context, I want to look at the latter part. Surah 2, 226 to 227. For those who swear not to have sexual relations with their wives is a waiting time of 4 months, but if they return to normal relations, then indeed Allah is forgiving and merciful, and if they decide on divorce, then indeed Allah is hearing and knowing. See, we're past the point of there being any doubt about the fact that Islam allows for and actively encourages marital rape. We're way past there being any doubt about the fact that there is an extreme double standard in Islam regarding conjugal obligations. However, there is a slight silver lining. Perhaps Islamic feminism is not dead yet. Perhaps, while yes, a woman must jump to her husband's sexual needs immediately, there is some obligation for the husband to sleep with his wife. Now, to get some more context, let's return back to Ibn Kathir. This ayah indicates that the ilah involves the wife and not a slave woman, as the majority of the scholars have agreed. This video isn't about sexual slavery in the Quran, I'll explore that later, but suffice it to say, even the meagre privileges afforded to wives in Islam are not afforded to sex slaves. Must wait 4 months, meaning the husband waits for 4 months from the time of the vow and then ends the ilah if the vow was for 4 or more months and is required to either return to his wife or divorce her. Then if they return, meaning to a normal relationship, having sexual intercourse with the wife, verily, Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful, with any shortcomings that occurred in the rights of the wife because of the vow of ilah. So basically taking this vow allows the man to neglect his, again, meagre obligations to his wife. Allah said, and if they decide upon divorce, then Allah is all-hearer, all-knower, indicating that divorce does not occur by merely passing the 4-month mark during the ilah. Malik reported from Nafi that Abdullah bin Umar said, if the man swears to ilah from his wife, then divorce does not occur automatically even after the 4 months have passed. When he stops at the 4-month mark, he should either divorce or return. Al-Bukhari also reported this hadith. Ibn Jarir reported that Suhail bin Abu Salih said that his father said, I asked 12 companions about the man who does ilah with his wife. They all stated that he does not have to do anything until the 4 months have passed, and then he has to either retain or divorce her. Ad-Darak Utni also reported this from Suhail. It is also reported from Umar, Uthman, Ali, Abu, Ad-Darda, Aisha, Ibn Umar, and Ibn Abbas. This is also the opinion of Sa'id bin Musayyib, Umar bin Abdulaziz, Mujahid, Tawus, Muhammad bin Kab, and Al-Qasim. So basically this is all about this oath called the ilah, which is explained in the website qtafsir.com, which elaborates further on Ibn Kathir. Ilah is a type of vow where a man swears not to sleep with his wife for a certain period, whether less or more than 4 months. If the vow of ilah is for less than 4 months, the man has to wait for the vow's period to end and then is allowed to have sexual intercourse with his wife. She has to be patient and she cannot ask her husband, in this case, to end his vow before the end of its term. It is reported in the 2 Sahihs that Aisha said that Allah's Messenger swore that he would stay away from his wives for a month. He then came down after 29 days saying, the lunar month is 29 days. Similarly was rated by Umar bin al-Khattab and reported in the 2 Sahihs, if the period of ilah is for more than 4 months, the wife is allowed in this case to ask her husband upon the end of the 4 months to end the ilah and have sexual relations with her. Otherwise he should divorce her by being forced to do so by the authorities if necessary, so that the wife is not harmed. Allah said, those who take an oath not to have sexual relations with their wife, meaning swear not to have sexual relations with the wife, this ayah indicates that ilah involves the wife and not a slave woman, as the majority of scholars have agreed. So basically, for a 4-month period, the woman has no right to ask of her husband that he sleep with her. It is only after 4 months that she is allowed to go ask her husband, and if the husband refuses, he should divorce her so she can go and marry somebody else and have sex with them. But that might sound like a bit of a rough choice for the wife, having to find a whole new husband just to have sex. And indeed, this option was so unattractive to some women that, if we cast our minds back a bit, Sorda was so afraid of being divorced that she preemptively traded away her right to intimacy to avoid having to be divorced. But think for a minute about how stupid this system is. So one day the husband can just say he's going to abstain from having sex with his wife for 4 months, and the wife isn't even allowed to ask him not to do that. Then after 4 months, the husband either has to divorce her or stick with her. There's no option for slowly working things out together through counselling. Nope, either divorce her or start having sex with her. This brings me back to 1 Corinthians 7, where, as we've said, there is no time frame given for when exactly the couples are supposed to give each other their conjugal rights. But this is a good thing, because it allows for common sense. Clearly, I can't just tell my wife to have sex with me the minute I want to, because the Bible commands it, because the Bible never says it needs to be immediate. Instead, I can use my own intuition to think about how often it would be reasonable for us to be having sex, and if we're being intimate with a frequency less than that, then I could bring it up with my wife, we could have a conversation, and then we could agree to go to counselling to try and work things out. Yes, if the relationship was simply not working on a physical level, divorce would be an option, but there are so many other options to explore before that, because the Bible doesn't have this strict time frame we see in the Quran. Now, if we make comparisons, there's another one that cannot be ignored. In the Quran, the husband has the ability to unilaterally declare that he is abstaining from having sex with his wife, and his wife cannot even ask him to stop. Meanwhile, in 1 Corinthians 7:5, do not deprive one another except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourself to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So in Christianity, the husband and the wife need to agree together. It is a mutual thing for mutual benefit, and there's no indication that the wife could expect to be forced into a position she begrudges due to her husband's unwillingness to have sex with her. Instead, both would be able to study scripture and grow closer to God while abstaining from physical intimacy. Essentially, it would be comparable to when an individual fasts from food to grow closer to God, except it is a couple fasting from sex. Meanwhile, in Islam, the husband isn't even necessarily abstaining from sex. The vow doesn't apply to slave girls, so the husband can still have sex with them. The only one actually being expected to abstain from sex here is the wife, and this isn't of her own choosing, but because her husband has decided he isn't going to sleep with her. Believe it or not, I had more I wanted to say in this video, but that will have to wait until another time. Before I go though, I do just want to look at this verse in the Quran. Surah 2:228. Divorced women remain in waiting for 3 months, and it is not lawful for them to conceal what Allah has created in their wombs if they believe in Allah and the last day. And their husbands have more rights to take them back in this period if they want reconciliation. And due to the wives is similar to what is expected of them according to what is reasonable. But the men have a degree over them in responsibility and authority, and Allah is exalted in might and wise. Now, particularly I want to focus on that bit in the middle, which isn't translated that favourably here, and Ibn Kathir gives a more favourable translation. And they, women, have rights over their husbands as regards living expenses, similar to those of their husbands over them, as regards obedience, degree of responsibility over them, and Allah is almighty, all-wise. That sounds good. Wives have the same rights as their husbands, but it sounds a bit suspicious knowing what we know so far. So let's look at the tafsir one last time. The rights the spouses have over each other. Allah said, and they, women, have rights over their husbands as regards living expenses, similar to those of their husband, over them as regards obedience and respect to what is reasonable. This ayah indicates that the wife has certain rights on her husband, just as he has certain rights on her, and each is obliged to give the other spouse his due rights. Now this on the surface doesn't mean much, since both the husband and wife can have rights over each other without these rights necessarily being equal. So let's see what these rights are. Muslim reported that Jabir said that Allah's messenger said, "Fear Allah regarding your women, for you have taken them by Allah's covenant and were allowed to enjoy with them sexually by Allah's words. You have the right on them that they do not allow anyone you dislike to sit on your mat. If they do that, then discipline them leniently. They have the right to be spent on and to be bought clothes in what is reasonable." Okay, so men have a right to women in return for the fact that men buy women things. Baz bin Hakim said that Muawiyah bin Haidar al-Kushairi related that his grandfather said, "O Messenger of Allah, what is the right the wife of one of us has?" The Prophet said, "To feed her when you eat, to buy her clothes when you buy for yourself, and to refrain from striking her on the face, cursing her, or staying away from her except in the house." So this is basically a slave relationship then. You buy them the basic necessities to survive, and you can hit them, but not in the face. This is why Muhammad punched Aisha in the stomach, not in her face. Waqi related that Ibn Abbas said, I like to take care of my appearance for my wife just as I like for her to take care of her appearance for me. This is because Allah says, and they, women, have rights similar to those of the husband over them to what is reasonable. This statement is reported by Ibn Jarir and Ibn Abu Hatim. I actually approve of this, and I think it lines up well with the logical interpretation of 1 Corinthians 7, where it says that the husband belongs to the wife and the wife to the husband. An implication I often think is missed here is the obligation to be your best physically for your significant other. I must have sex with my wife because by marrying her I am accepting that my body belongs to her, but if my body belongs to her, and that is why I should be having sex with her, should my body then be the kind of body she isn't going to want to have sex with? Should my body be gross and unwashed? Should my body be covered in excessive hair that she'll dislike? Should my body be out of shape? No, instead, by getting married, I am not just accepting an obligation to have sex with my wife, but also a physical obligation to make my body appealing to my wife through basic hygiene, grooming, and exercise. Now, these standards will vary from person to person. One couple might love going to the gym and want to be constantly pushing to be at peak performance, while another couple might just want to make sure they eat right and go out for walks once in a while. And obviously there shouldn't be an obsession over exact equality, but it's not right for a wife to make an effort to make herself look good, while a husband treats his body not like it's the property of his sexual partner, but rather as if it belongs to him and he can let it become ugly and unappealing. Right now I'm not going to the gym because I want to spend every spare minute working on scripting videos, and even then I struggle to get them out as much as I'd want to, so my body is not looking its best. However, if I got married, I'd want to make sure my body looked good, and I'd expect something similar from my partner, because sex is supposed to be good. Sex is supposed to be enjoyable, and part of that means having sex with somebody you find physically attractive. Obviously, part of this is that the Bible condemns gluttony and sloth, which means sticking to a sensible diet and exercising our essential Christian principles. However, does Ibn Abbas's comment make sense when the Quran is clear that the obligation is of the wife to the husband, and only in the very loosest sense is it ever the other way around? In conclusion, remember when I said that not only is it seldom true that understanding the context will make an objectionable Quran verse seem less horrendous, but that actually looking at the context can even make the seemingly benign verses show their evil underpinnings? This is a good example of that. Women have the same rights as men, but according to Muhammad's companions, through which is the only way to understand the Quran, we are told that this refers primarily to the fact that men, who control most of the wealth, will give that wealth to women in exchange for sex. That's horrendous. Still, at least Ibn Abbas is slightly more egalitarian than the rest on this point. In conclusion. Sorry, I accidentally cut that out when I was editing, so I had to just add it in there. 1. A man can have sex with his wife however he wants because she's like farmland to him. 2. A woman is obligated to have sex with a man at a moment's notice. 3. This obligation does not go both ways, however, because A. A man can refuse to sleep with his wife as punishment, B. Or because she is old, C. Or simply arbitrarily for a period of 4 months. 4. A woman owes her husband sex in return for him spending money on her. Now, you might say that only the first part has anything to do with marital rape, but I beg to differ. The origin of rape is not demons or psychosis or anything like that. The origin of rape is entitlement, the idea that you own a woman and that because you've done something for a woman, that means they owe you sex. You can't blame this on the culture of the time. Firstly, because according to Muslims this was written by the eternal God, but secondly because we already have a text from 600 years earlier that describes a completely different vision of married life, one where sex isn't given in exchange for something else, but rather is a good thing to do in itself, one where physical intimacy is seen as a mutual expectation from both parties in a loving relationship, and one where abstention from sex is viewed to be healthy and righteous only when agreed upon as a mutual decision. Now, I'm not saying that the Bible would pass a rigorous feminist analysis with flying colours. There are plenty of problematic passages in the Bible, some of which I'll go through in due time, but for now, this passage represents a contrast between two perhaps seemingly similar verses on the face of things, which are, upon closer inspection, worlds apart. Anyway, with that said, I leave you with this quote. The virtue men have over women. Allah said, but men have a degree of responsibility over them. This ayah indicates that men are in the more advantageous position than women physically as well as in their mannerism, status, obedience of women to them, spending, taking care of the affairs and in general in their lives and in the hereafter. Allah said in another ayah, men are the protectors and maintainers of women because Allah has made one of them to excel over the other and because they spend to support them from their means. 434. And there we go. That says it all, really. So, I hope you enjoyed that, guys. Basically, like, subscribe, share, and subscribe to my new channel if you found it interesting. I mean, it will be interesting, I think, all the stuff on there. It's something I'm very passionate about, similar to my feminism, but obviously I don't mind if you don't. We'll see how it goes. Thank you to my current patrons, Ben Name, Eric Hernandez, Finnegan Flan, Getting Off Podcast, Hannah Taylor, Kirsten, LRX89, Nancy D, Stephen, and Thz. You're all very appreciated.